There you go. Hey, Zapponians, how are you? I love you guys. I mean, you have gone posh, though. This is not what it looked like 10 years ago. This building didn't exist. You were not as big of a company. You were not as much of a role model. How many companies in the world have people like Holly and Arun come up and do psychology on stage? That was not easy, right? Well, Tony and I are sort of brain and heart, I guess, in some way. I like pyramids, he likes Fernet. I haven't learned to like that drink, but I love being back here and sharing my story 10 years later. 10 years ago, Tony was a big fan of one of my books, my third book I wrote 10 years ago called Peak. So I'm going to introduce that to you, yeah, let's get started. So what do you think is the most neglected fact? And by the way, I know I look like an aging Chippendales dancer, but I was coming to Vegas. I mean, what else? I mean, so thank you. No clothes are coming off. HR, don't worry. You don't want to see that. So what's the most neglected fact in business? Guess? It's that we're all human. It sort of gets lost on a balance sheet, gets lost sometimes in all kinds of forms because it's sort of hard to measure in many ways. But it is the truism around most companies at this point. We're sort of moving into an era where there'll be a lot of companies that might not have a whole lot of humans anymore. But the truth is, this is the defining characteristic of virtually every company in the world. And yet, most of us don't have an operating system or a playbook for understanding humans. You know, I took one psychology class in college. I went to business school and didn't learn any psychology there. So what is the playbook that helps you to understand this raw material ingredient that's true in all companies? I'm going to talk about that. I have had the great fortune of starting a company called Joie de Vivre 31 years ago when I was a young 26-year-old, and loved that. It was one of the first boutique hotel companies in the US, based in San Francisco. And then for the last 5 years, I've had the great honor of being asked by the three founders of Airbnb to come in and initially be Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO's mentor, but then also become the head of global hospitality and strategy for the company. And I did that for 4 years, and now I'm a strategic advisor. So I have worked in a company I started from scratch at age 26, and then in a company where I was twice the age of the average employee when I joined Airbnb at age 52 5 years ago. Do the math. Now you know why you don't want me to take this off. So I have seen the model I'm going to show you now work in both companies. Part of the reason that the founders asked me to join Airbnb and help be one of the senior leaders there was because they liked my book Peak, as Tony did. Tony's wrote the foreword to the book. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. So Joie de Vivre, company I started 31 years ago, almost exclusively in Northern California. When I was there as the CEO for 24 years, we were just in California, mostly in Northern California. I created 52 boutique hotels, which is the most, there's no CEO of a boutique hotel company in the world has actually created more boutique hotels under their time running a company. Really enjoyed it, and then I sold it in 2010. Airbnb, it's now 4.5 million. This slide was from last week. Things are growing quickly in this company. Started with 3 mattresses on a floor, on a living room floor, and you probably know the story, and now is really the largest hospitality brand in the world. It was a very interesting thing to be asked by these guys to come in and help 5 years ago when we were, I guess 97% of the room nights we've had have been in the last 5 years, to take a little company and turn it into a big hospitality brand. But we used the model I'm going to talk about today, understanding humans. What's the playbook for understanding humans as our way to actually grow? So when people ask me occasionally to go give speeches at business schools and they say, show us your business model, you know, very appropriate, Holly, that you actually talked about this, I show them this slide. And they all laugh and they say, ha 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 ha, that's your funny slide, but show us your true business model. And I say, no, this is it. Actually, it came out of the Harvard Business School, but it wasn't in the shape of a heart. It was called the service profit chain. And Zappos is absolutely built on it. It came out of studies that were done 40 years ago that showed that if you create a great culture, it leads to happy employees, enthusiastic staff, which leads to loyal customers because they actually can feel the love from the employees. And that leads to market share growth, which leads to a profitable and sustainable business. Interestingly, in this model, which is unusual, number 4 is profitability. You got to do the other 3 things first to create a sustainable, profitable model into the long term. I call it karmic capitalism because what goes around comes around. If you feel well treated as an employee, you treat your customers well. So that was the basic model for the company I started. And we ran the company that way with each hotel or restaurant or spa that we opened. And every single new employee in the company, and over half of our employees have English as a second language, 82% of our employees were actually hourly workers as opposed to salaried workers. But we taught them the heart, because a heart is universal. It is something that we all have, and it's something that we can relate to. And we talked with our employees and said, if this heart is not working, tell us which artery the heart is not working. And a lot of times it was the artery between number 1 and number 2. The culture wasn't somehow leading to happy employees or enthusiastic staff. So now I'm going to go to the dark slide. This is purposeful. The technical staff back here said, do you want a dark slide? And I say, yes, I do, because I'm going to tell my story for a moment. So I know you're all about stories. And people think, someone like Chip gets up here dressed like a Chippendales dancer and is going to talk about all his big successes. But I got to tell you, for those of you who want to be entrepreneurs and grow your own company someday or grow within this company, it isn't always a bed of roses. There are going to be bad times too. In 2001, my company that I'd started, Joie de Vivre, was about 15 years old, and we had 21 hotels around the San Francisco Bay Area. During the dot-com boom, that was big time, because we were growing revenues double-digit every year, partly because the growth within the Bay Area between 1995 and 2001 was pretty epic. And then 2001 came along, and we had a dot-com bust. The boom was over. We had 9/11, and after 9/11, not a lot of people wanted to jump on an airplane. It got harder to come to the U.S. if you were coming to visit the U.S. because of security restrictions. SARS happened in Asia. 90% of Asian travel to the U.S. stopped in 2002, or I think it was the year, or 2003. And the biggest location that people in Asia were coming to travel to was the Bay Area. We had a war, we had a recession, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And stupidly, I called my company Joie de Vivre, and most of you don't know during that time, but we actually boycotted French fries in this country during the Iraq War because we were at war, diplomatically with the French. Do you remember that time? Anybody at all? So that was the time where I was getting these emails from Alabama and maybe rural Nevada saying, we hate you, Joie de Vivre, you Frenchies, we don't want your business. And I would write them back and I'd say, wait a minute. We're not a French company. We're a US company. We're based in San Francisco. And they would write back, San Francisco, ? Oh, that's worse. So San Francisco sort of left of Paris. We won't get political. There's too much politics these days anyways. But let me just say, my company was on the road to ruin. I was running out of cash. I didn't know 4 months from now, we had no way to pay payroll for our 1,500 employees, 12 to 1,500 employees at that time. So what do you do if you're a CEO and feeling not a lot of joie de vivre? I felt like a fake because I'd called my company Joie de Vivre, means joy of life, and I wasn't feeling a whole lot of joy. So I went to a local bookstore, a bookstore that no longer exists because it was disrupted, a Borders bookstore at Union Square in San Francisco. And I went on the second floor to the business section of the bookstore, and I went looking for a business book to help me, and I couldn't find one. But fortunately, right next to the business section in that old bookstore that no longer exists was the psychology self-help section of the bookstore, which is where I went and where I got reintroduced to this guy. Not that he was standing there, he died in 1970. But Abraham Maslow was the first psychologist of some fame in the world to really talk about positive psychology and the idea of people living up to their potential. He said what a man, let's call it a woman or a man, can be, he or she must be. And he talked about this idea of self-actualization and self-fulfillment, and he went out and studied 1,000 people historically and present day in the mid-20th century America, and ended up creating this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Very iconic psychology theory. Yes, I took one psychology class in college. I remember this theory. So I sat on the floor, on the second floor of Borders Bookstore in San Francisco, and I started reading for like 2 hours, reading this book until the store manager tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You got to buy the book," which I did, and then I read it over the course of a long weekend, and then I read another Maslow book. And then I asked myself, well, if humans can have a hierarchy of needs, physiological needs, sleep, water, food, air, and then once those are partially met, you move up the pyramid to this idea of being all you can be at the top of the pyramid, self-actualization, which is where peak experiences happen. Why can't a company be like this? Because companies are just full of humans. So I came back to the office at one point to our executive team, which was 15 of us. We have a weekly meeting, and I said, let's become a self-actualized company. And they looked at me and laughed, because from their point of view, we were in survival mode. Now, I think everybody in life is in one of these three modes. You're in a survival mode, you're in success mode, or you're in transformation mode. A lot of us aspire to success, not realizing that there's something beyond that. We as a company were about to go out of business, and I'm talking about self-actualization. So my senior leadership team thought I was crazy, and so I then came back to the next meeting we had as a group, and I said, this is the pyramid. This is a pyramid I created. I took Maslow's 5-level pyramid, turned it into a 3-level pyramid, where the first 2 levels of Maslow's pyramid are at the base, levels 3 and 4 in the middle, and transformations at the top. And I said, what if we're going to go out of business, let's go out of business and learn something at the same time. Let's try this. What if we applied this pyramid to our 3 most important stakeholders, our employees, our customers, and our investors? And that's what we did, and I'll go through that really quickly now. So here's the employee pyramid: money, recognition, and meaning. One of the things I've learned, frankly, over the last 10 years, since Tony and I first started talking about this, is the lines in between, like money and recognition and meaning, go up and down. The more you're working in an environment like the Bay Area, where it's really expensive to live, and if you're an hourly employee, money is probably 80% of that pyramid, because you're just trying to pay the rent. Similarly, investment bankers have a similar perspective on Wall Street. It's mostly money. But there's always a differentiator. Yes, money is the baseline, but money is not the number one reason people leave their job in the US overall. It's the 4th most likely reason a person leaves their job. What's the number one reason people leave their job in the US? Their boss, their manager, exactly. And that's why the 2nd level of this pyramid is really important, recognition. So money is a job, as you can see on the left-hand side there. When you feel recognized and you feel like your manager, your boss, the company recognizes you, appreciates you, and has a path for you, you feel like you have a career. Now that's a great place for anybody to get to, but the magic on all 3 of the pyramids I'm going to show you happens on the 3rd level. And the 3rd level is where you take people to a sense of having a calling and a sense of meaning in the work you do, and a sense of having a sense of inspiration in being there. And Zappos is that kind of place. Not for everybody, not every day, but it's a place that actually aspires to create a place of meaning. So one of the things I've also learned in the last few years since writing the book originally is the following. Not all of us get meaning the same way. So this is a front desk clerk at one of our hotels. We call our front desk clerk hosts, which is very ironic. For all those years, 31 years as a hotelier, I decided to rename our front desk clerks hosts, and then I joined Airbnb, and everybody's a host. So I love that. So as a front desk host, that's a housekeeper. That's a bartender. We'll see a few of those later today. I know how you guys like to drink. So these 3 people and these 3 job classifications may have a different sense of meaning. Great leaders, great managers, great humans understand that we're not all the same. So we did a research project with our different job classifications and found out that the thing that was most important to our front desk hosts, what gave them meaning, was knowing that the guests in the hotel really felt that they were at a home or away from home, that they created a relationship with them. So what we did in that downturn, and let me get to the bottom line on this. During that downturn where all of the people in the Bay Area thought Joie de Vivre was going out of business, between 2001 and 2006, we tripled in size when most of our competitors had bankruptcies and foreclosures, partly because of what I'm showing you now. So during that really difficult time, when we didn't have a lot of money to be able to provide recognition or meaning, the number one thing we heard from our front desk hosts was, we just want to hear from our guests that we're doing a great job. So the thing we did is we had a monthly meeting for each of our hotels. We would bring in 2 guests who happened to be staying in the hotel at that time, who were regular guests of ours, and they'd get up and they'd just tell a 3 to 5 minute story about why they love the hotel, including, we said, you have to give at least 3 examples of people on the staff who deserve some credit and give specifics about the credit. That's one form of creating meaning, is helping people feel like the work they do is impactful. The housekeeping staff at our hotels, they liked that as well, but the number one thing that gave meaning to our housekeeping staff was doing a weekly or at least every other week potluck. 90% of our housekeeping staff are immigrants. They're new to this country, and they actually sometimes don't have a real community that they've built, other than maybe their family and a couple of friends, because they've immigrated to the country. So sometimes their work environment is where they get that sense of community. And they're from all kinds of countries. So the idea that there would be an international potluck, and we'd help sponsor that. So every week or every other week, the housekeeping staff would help pay for it and give them the extra time off during the middle of the day to actually bring in food from their country. A Filipina housekeeper could bring in lumpia, etc. You like lumpia? Yeah, go for it. And then they actually build a relationship with their fellow housekeepers. That's what was meaning for them. The bartenders, let's be clear, they're mercenaries. Bartenders love the tips in our bars, and they love to drink, and they love to have a good time. So the number one thing that gave them meaning was the fact that what we said in that downturn is, well, gosh, we have a lot of empty hotel rooms. What if we start giving every quarter 2 free hotel rooms to anybody on staff who's in good standing, who's been in the company for 3 months or longer, and so you can go take basically a free weekend somewhere in California at one of our hotels, and that's a perk. The bartenders love that. So the key there is different people find meaning in different ways. Let's go to the customer pyramid. The customer pyramid, at the base of the pyramid, is meeting your expectations. Now, a Zappos customer has a certain set of expectations. You've built a pretty high set of expectations for your customers, right? And so there's a satisfaction that you deliver. But the truth is, in the world we live in, in the internet world, it's very promiscuous. Our customers are very promiscuous, and that means that they have lots of other choices, and they're not as loyal as they used to be. So if you actually deliver on their desires, which is at the top, at the middle of the pyramid here, you're making the customer feel successful. They're more likely to be committed. When you're trying to figure out what's the difference between expectations and desires, just remember, desires as you move up the pyramid are not what all your competitors are attaining or striving for. It's usually something that's the desire of a customer that might be better than what they would get from your competitor. But the magic in this pyramid also happens at the top of the pyramid. It's where the evangelism happens. It's where Zappos starts offering things like free shipping, no matter what, even if you're not going to buy something, before anybody else is doing that. And that's when you're addressing the unrecognized needs of your customers. What's an unrecognized need? It's like I created a hotel in San Francisco called the Hotel Vitale. We created on the top floor of the hotel 13 years ago a yoga studio. And we had free yoga classes on the top floor of this hotel in a business district, in a financial district. My investors said, that's nuts. It's a business person's hotel. Who wants to do yoga? They were saying this not 13 years ago. This was like 17 years ago when we were about to build the hotel. But I said, you know what? I think it's an unrecognized need. I think there's more and more people traveling, and a lot of women traveling as business people who would like to go and do a yoga class before going to work. Why not? We tried it. It was hugely successful. But your customer doesn't always tell you. The Walkman customer didn't tell Sony, I want the iPod. So sometimes the thing you have to find at the top of the pyramid is something your customers didn't even ask for. What I learned early on at Airbnb was we needed to get really clear about what our differentiator, what was our unrecognized need that we needed to ask ourselves. So we did this little exercise and we said, what business are we in? And you could do this at Zappos. I had one person sitting here, one person sitting here, and I asked that person, what business are we in? And this person would say, well, we're in the home sharing business. Great. And then I would say again, okay, what business are we in? And the second time, they can't say the same thing over again. So they'd say, well, we're in the extended stay lodging business because our average length of stay is twice as long as a hotel. By the fifth time, if you can't say the same thing over again, we came to learn we were in the belong anywhere business. Airbnb's core of what it is all about, which I helped to be involved in the process of creating this 5 years ago, was realizing that people want a sense of belonging, and they want to do it anywhere. Airbnb is in 81,000 cities. I bet Marriott, the biggest hotel company in the world, is in no more than about 1,000 cities when you count all the cities that they're in. So we're anywhere, but we help people belong. That led us to creating this ad last year during the Super Bowl. And yeah, you can clap, that's fine. Yeah. We live in an era where that kind of ad is necessary. And over 50% of our business is people traveling across borders, people staying in another country. So it's really important that we create in a world where people can have a sense of belonging anywhere. We probably would never have created that ad if we hadn't figured out the unrecognized need that our customers wanted was to have a sense that they could belong anywhere. So think about doing that exercise with your department at some point, and with some of your colleagues, or with your team, or what do you call it? Your circle, exactly. Let's move on to the investor pyramid. I'm going to spend just a moment on this. I know Amazon is your partner here, and they hopefully have a legacy perspective on this. Most investors are transactionally aligned. They just want how much money you're going to make, how quickly. That's what they expect of the entrepreneur or the company. Relationship-aligned investors are like Warren Buffett. He makes an investment in a company. He says, he says to the CEO of the companies he invests in, imagine that you're here 100 years from now. We're making a relationship investment in you. Legacy investors are the kind of people who say, you know what, this company is meant to be a role model. And that's what Zappos is. So if you take all three of these pyramids and you put them together, you create 5 pyramids. You do, I know, it's crazy. There's 5 pyramids. There's the 3, and then there's the big one, the 4, and then there's an upside-down pyramid in the middle. When I first created this concept for my company, Joie de Vivre, first of all, this is a lot. It's like during a recession and the dot-com bust, to actually come up with this was crazy. Luckily, my senior team was so good at being open to it, and then they helped create some of it with me. I didn't know what should go in the middle there. I used to just have something in the middle that says the inspired company. And then one day, somebody was smart enough, a woman just said to me, there's something that's really core to who we are as a company that fits perfectly in the middle. And you guys saw, it was on a slide earlier. What is it? The heart. That was when I realized we created the Joie de Vivre heart in 1997. We created the overall pyramid you're seeing here in 2002, 2003. The heart piece didn't actually come in place till about 2004. But what's beautiful about the heart, if you see there, the bottom point of the heart, the culture is the starting point. That's like where the blood is flowing. Point number 2 on the heart was the enthusiastic staff. Which pyramid is it next to? The employee one. Which pyramid is the customer part of the heart next to? Weirdly, the customer pyramid. And which part of the heart, or the profitable and sustainable part of the heart, which is number 4 on the heart, is next to the investor pyramid. And so what does a heart do if it does its job well? It beats. Oh, I love this. Animation. The heart is what allows these three pyramids to come together and create a holistic business model based upon humans with the premise that we all have a hierarchy of needs in everything we do. If you're going on a date this Saturday night, you have survival needs, you have success needs, and you have transformation needs. These are a bunch of companies that are using Maslow. Yes, Zappos is in there partly because Tony loves us and because some of the concepts here have actually been relevant to how you have operated and grown as a company. But there's a bunch of other great companies out there that have been using Maslow or using my book Peak. And that's, for those of you who are the skeptics in the crowd, like Arun, the brainiacs, I like Arun. But some of you are saying this is way, way, way too heart-filled and this doesn't make sense. Well, if you felt that way, you probably wouldn't be working at Zappos. That's starting point. Yeah, right? Secondly, this article came out, I think Tony might have even been in this article, in this issue of Harvard Business Review about, 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years after my book came out. They had an issue with a happy face on the cover. How often does the Harvard Business Review do that? And the whole issue was focused on the idea that it's happiness that creates success. Happiness is what creates successful companies. And so, I appreciate the fact that Zappos is one of the role models for that. This is the book that I wrote 10 years ago. It's now in a revised edition where I've, in a paperback. I understand from Josh, you have lots and lots of copies in your offices. And if you want to get a copy tomorrow, they're there for you. Tony, you can read Tony's, you just read Tony's forward to the book, and then you don't have to read the rest. But my basic premise is that peak experiences create peak performance. And I think that's what we've seen over and over again. So I now, when I'm walking around, I see everything in triangles or in pyramids. Everything looks like a pyramid to me. But imagine in your own life or in your work life here at Zappos, what if every single person you interacted with, you sort of looked at them, whether it's somebody who's calling in and you're giving some support to a customer, whether it's a fellow employee, whether it's at home when you go home at nighttime and it's your roommate or your spouse, whether it's your parent. What if you wore a pair of Elton John-like pyramid glasses and saw the world in that transformational pyramid kind of way? Survival, succeed, transform. How could I help this person on the survival level and help them feel like it was a survival experience at minimum? But more importantly, how can I make them feel successful and like they've enjoyed the time with me? Or thirdly, and this is where it gets the best, because this is what differentiates you and creates loyalty, not just from you to another person as a friend, but from you as a company to your customers and as well you as employees, is if you get to that transformational part of the pyramid, you're doing something that's magical, that most people don't do. And let me say, having seen a lot of companies out there are very, very few companies out there that have an operating system or a playbook that's based on humans. I'm glad you're one of them, and I love you, and it's so good to be back. Thank you.